We know that in a game of chess, that the king is the most valuable and also the vulnerable piece on that board. It is, of course, that piece that, if it is captured, signals the end of the game. Now, I'm no expert in playing chess, believe you me, and I've lost many, many, many games with my children over the past years. But even I know that if the king is surrounded, if the king is in the position that he can no longer move, where he's completely surrounded by his enemies and there's no escape, the next word that comes out of the opponent's mouth is checkmate. So this morning's message I want to bring in and bring an encouragement to you is the king still has one more move. And the word that I want to share is so much more than what happens on a chessboard. You see, in our life, we often find times that we're confronted with trials and tribulations that can shake us to the core. We may experience loss. We may experience disappointment or despair, leaving us feeling defeated and hopeless. But it's precisely in these moments of despair, that we must remember the promise, and with our faith, that our King, our God, is never powerless, never defeated. When we find ourselves trapped in circumstances beyond our control, when we feel overwhelmed by the trials of what's happening in this world, and as you know, there's a lot going on, we must cling to our faith and trust that God is still at work. Just as a king in the game of a chess can move and can make that move and turn a game around, so too can God intervene in our lives in ways that we cannot even imagine. So today, as I share this message, I want to look at some scriptures where we also see it many times in these situations that people were facing back then that seemed hopeless, that's where we see the king still had one more move. In Genesis, if we look at Joseph, we see here he was sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused and thrown into prison. Yet through it all, God had a plan for Joseph, a plan to prosper him and not to harm him, a plan to give him hope and a future. And in the end, of course, we see Joseph becoming a powerful leader and ruler in Egypt, saving his family and countless others from the famine. In the book of Daniel, in chapter 6, we see the story of Daniel in the lion's den, where some of the king's wise men were jealous of what was happening. The wise men knew Daniel prayed to God, so they tricked the king into making a new law. Anyone who prayed to God would be thrown into the lion's den. But yet Daniel chose to pray to God anyway. And this is what played out, reading from verse 19 in chapter 6 of Daniel. At the first dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near to the den, he called out to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "My king, may the king live forever. My God sent an angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." And in verse 23, we read, "The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God." You see, the king still had one more move in that situation. And as we go into the New Testament, we see the story about how Jesus calms a storm in Matthew chapter 8. And in the story, the disciples find themselves in such panic. And they cry out in desperation, fearing for their lives. Whereas Jesus, he's there. He's just asleep, undeterred by the chaos surrounding him. The disciples woke him up, shouting, Lord, save us. We're going to drown. Jesus responded, why are you afraid? You have so little faith. And of course, we see him get up and rebuke the wind and the waves, and then the storm calmed. And of course, his disciples were amazed. Jesus had one more move in their despair. We can choose to be surrounded by what the enemy wants us to hear or do. In those times we can stand on our faith and know that even in our darkest hour, in those moments, it is our God, the King of Kings. It is him that can and will move. You see, when the disciples woke Jesus up and was crying out and saying, basically, teacher, don't you care about what's happening? We're going to perish. How often do we echo sometimes those words in our own prayers? But Jesus responded, not with rebuke, but with action. He rebuked the wind and the storm, but yet he gave them a lesson. Because the disciples witnessed at firsthand that lesson, that the power of Jesus over those elements. And Jesus said to them, why are you afraid? Have you no faith? And in the midst of that storm, Jesus calls them to trust in him, to have that faith, that he is in control, even when everything seems out of control. How often do we find ourselves in similar situations? We're facing challenges that seem unsurmountable, and it feels that God is distant and he's silent, unconcerned with our struggles. But I want to encourage you, Jesus is present. Just as he was present in the boat with the disciples, he too is present with us in the middle of the storms, when things thinking, what do we do next? What's happening? We've got no option but to trust in God. Now, last weekend, a few of the men went up to a high country lake, and I drove them there, and we had a fantastic time. It was great. Some people fished, some people walked, and it was an amazing time to be together. And as I was fishing, I noticed a group of men around a certain car, and I was thinking, oh, maybe they've caught a fish. Right, I'll go and look. But they didn't. What had happened is that someone had, unfortunately, locked keys in the boot of a car, and the car was also locked. So we tried and tried and tried to think, okay, how do we get into the car? And we tried tape on the window and tried to pull it down, which I saw on YouTube by a policeman, but that didn't work. So sorry, the law, that didn't work. And we tried to use keys. We tried everything else. And we tried at the back, we tried at the side, we tried, our last resort was, well, okay, if we can't get him because, there was no spare key too, because we couldn't drive and get another spare key. So we were, people were praying about it and just thinking, come on, yes, it's going to work. No, it's not working. Okay, what's happening? So our last resort, I was thinking, we were sort of agreed, our last resort is to tape up the window and get a rock and break the window so we can get him. Yes, there's expense of replacing the window, but at least that person can drive home. We were in despair, but the king still had one move. Jesus still had one move, because he sent someone to us in a ute, and he went back and forth and he got the tools, and two of the guys were amazing, and they got a wire in there, and eventually a couple of moves and times, clicked the lever, and we were in, and it was amazing. Today, what is a storm that you are facing? Something that's making you feel surrounded, fearful. I want to encourage you today that the king that moved in the lives of those in the scriptures we have heard about today is the same king that will move in your life. You just let him be in the storm. This picture that's on the screen, it's a picture that used to be in the Louvre Art Gallery in France, and it's now in private ownership. The painting depicts two chess players. One is Satan on this side, and the other is a man who looks in despair. The enemy thinks he has won. Because if the enemy wins, he wins the man's soul. And that's what this painting is depicting. The painting is known as Checkmate, and it was painted in the mid-1800s. Now, one day when this painting was in the Louvre in France, there was a tour going through the gallery, and a world-famous chess player was in that tour. And he stopped at the painting for a while, and he looked at it, and he saw it, and the tour kept on going. And the tour guide came back to him and said, "What's wrong? You know, we're moving on. What are you doing?" And the chess player, this person said to me, "You know that I'm a world champion chess player. And I've been looking at this painting and I've noticed something." And the tour leader asked him, "Well, what is it?" He said, "Well, you know that I'm a world chess champion player." I think he was proud of that fact. And I was looking at this painting. I see what the average person cannot because of my skill and experience in playing the game. He said to the tour guide, "They've either got to change the name of the painting or repaint the painting. Because what I'm seeing is this man still has one more move. The king still has one more move. He is not defeated by the enemy." You see, the man can move the king, and the devil, the enemy, will be in checkmate, and he will lose the game. This man who looks downcast, who thinks he's going to lose, the king still has one more move. I want to encourage you. Remember, you are not alone, but the king still has one more move, like in this painting. You know, a number of years ago, I went through a time that at that time was diagnosed as situational depression. And then there was a number of factors that happened all at once that led to my mental health not being so great. You know, I didn't even want to get out of bed. I thought there was no way out. Yet in that darkness, although I didn't see it, the king still had one more move. You see, I had to get myself out of that situation also. I had to act and do something myself. And a part of that was accepting that actually, yes, I needed that help, not only from those around me, but that God, even though I thought he was distant and not in the picture, yet in that darkness, I came to a place where I said, "God, I just need to trust you." But I had to do something. Yes, I went through counseling. Yes, I was on medication at the time. So I had to do something to get myself out of that state that I was in. You see, in the game of chess, even if the king is surrounded and is in danger of losing the game, it's actually the player that's got to move the piece. Sometimes we just need to move and do something. We just need to decide to do something that will bring us closer into his presence, that will give us that hope, give us open eyes to see what he sees. We know that God can and he will do miracles. We know that. In our darkest moments when we need a miracle, yes, as we come into his presence, there are moments that a miracle can and will take place as we cry to God. You know, sometimes we cannot see our way out of that fear or anxiety. Sometimes we just need to stop and move into his presence. And with faith, believe that the king still has one more move. Pastor Denise was sharing last week. It's about taking that time out, spending time in his presence, listening or reading to the word, taking that time out, seeking his face in worship, taking that time to get closer to him. You see, if the player does not move their king on a chessboard in time, the king is defeated. He is in checkmate. But we have a choice to make that move towards a king that is never defeated. So what is it today that you may be facing? that you just need a miracle? Or can I ask it this way? What can you do to move the King closer in that moment? Is it extending an olive branch of peace to a family member, even if you think they are in the wrong? Do you just need to ask for help, even though you think it will make you seem weak? Maybe it's just taking time out, spending that time focusing on the one who will never leave you, the one who will never forsake you. And in that moment, seeing his grace, his mercy, experiencing his love in your life because of the move you took. Throughout the scriptures, we have seen these examples of how God moved in Joseph and Daniel and the disciples. But I think the greatest moment we see in scripture is that at the cross. The enemy thought it was finished. I've won. Jesus is getting led to the cross. He's nailed there between two thieves. It seems that he was defeated, even as he cried out at last breath, and he was taken to the tomb and laid there. It seemed that the enemy had won on the first day, even on the second day. It seemed that it was all over. But because the King still had one more move, on the third day, we see Jesus, the Son of God, rising again. And that same power that defeated his death is also the same power that is in our lives and can overcome everything that we are going through. Today, let us move and do something that brings us into his presence. Today, if you need a move, if you need to know that the King still has one more move, I would encourage you as we play the song, come to the front. And as we stand in his presence and as we continue to worship, your moving forward is saying to God, here I am, move in my life. And if you need prayer also, please come forward and someone will stand with you, declaring that the King still has one more move for that prayer. Whatever it is, that the King still has one more move. So let us stand. Thank you, Jesus. We believe that you have one more move in our lives. You have one more move over the city. You have one more move over our nation. But most importantly, you have one more move over individual lives standing here today, declaring that you are the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords,